Recent elections in the United Kingdom revealed something bigger than a normal political shift. The two parties with the most momentum in Britain today are the parties least aligned with the old hawkish foreign policy consensus. On the right, reform is attracting anti-establishment voters increasingly skeptical of foreign escalation and the Atlanticist order. And on the left, the Greens are gaining support from voters deeply opposed to war, militarism, and intervention. Now, these parties disagree on almost everything else, from immigration, economics, culture, and climate policy, but they are benefiting from a growing public backlash against the establishment parties that have dominated British foreign policy for decades. Labour and the Tories support the same hawkish worldview, but growing numbers of British voters do not. Hello, I'm Michael. This is Southern Realism, a channel about power, geopolitics, and decline. The recent UK local elections were deeply damaging to both Labour and the Tories. Labour lost nearly 1,500 council seats, while the Conservatives continue their long collapse after years of political instability, economic frustration, and an unwillingness to do anything about immigration. But geopolitically, the energy inside British politics is now increasingly moving towards parties outside the traditional establishment consensus. Reform, led by Nigel Farage, continues to gain support from voters frustrated with mass migration, economic stagnation, and elite political management. But there's also a growing foreign policy dimension to this shift, because Reform voters are often more skeptical of escalation in the Ukraine, more hostile to endless foreign entanglements, and less emotionally attached to the Atlanticist worldview that dominated British politics after World War II. At the same time, the Greens are gaining support, especially among younger and more anti-war voters deeply hostile to militarism, interventionism, and confrontation abroad. The Greens and Reform disagree on almost every major domestic issue, but they are both benefiting from growing public dissatisfaction with the same foreign policy establishment. Beyond Reform, there are even growing parties further to the right, which are even less hawkish and less pro-war. In other words, the political momentum in Britain increasingly appears to be moving against the old pro-war consensus rather than towards it. For decades, Britain's political establishment was unified around the same Atlanticist foreign policy, from Tony Blair in Iraq to Boris Johnson in the Ukraine. But the recent elections suggest that consensus may be fracturing. Across Britain and increasingly across Europe, political momentum is slowly moving away from the old interventionist order and towards parties far more skeptical of war, escalation, and elite foreign policy consensus.